So, good morning, all of you. Good evening, afternoon, in your respective locations. And we are continuing today with our series of lectures about Raga-vartma-candrika, the moon ray, which sheds light, illuminates the path of Raga Bhakti, of passionate love. So today we are in our eighth meeting already. So we are continuing with our discussion on verse number 11 of the first illumination, first part of the book. So this is the second part of our discussion of this 11th verse, which will be discussed along who knows how many sessions, but at least I think 4 or 5 meetings. So let's make some brief recap of our Monday class. We started to study this 11th verse, and in the same way we will remember the main verse that we are analyzing here. So in this 11th verse, Srila Raga-vartma Thakur will elaborate on the first of 3 main verses, if you remember, 3 main verses that Srila Rupa Goswami shares in his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu about the angas of Raga Bhakti, the main attributes or practices or approaches to the practice that characterize Raga Bhakti. So the first one of these 3 verses mention that one should remember Krishna and his dear associates of one's own preference, being attached to narrations about them and always residing in Braj. So 3 main points are mentioned here. So in the 11th verse of this first part of Raga-vartma-candrika, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti tries to elaborate on that. So he mentioned, so we will recall the whole verse because today we will continue discussing it. He mentioned this first verse of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, mentioning that the first part, Krishna Shmaran, refers to remembering Krishna, and that this is indicating the anga, the limb of Shmaran, which is prominent in the path of Raga Nuga Bhakti, Vishwanath mentions, since Raga is a function of the mind. Raga means attachment, basically. So that's a function of the mind, in direction to the material world and direction to the transcendental realm. Then the word Prashna is here, which means most beloved, which indicates Vishwanath mentions Sri Krishna, who is the beloved lover of Vrindavan and who enjoys Lila according to his own specific bhava or mood. Then we have the words Janam Chasya, which speaks about his people, Krishna's people, which refers to Krishna's close devotees, Nitya Parikars, eternal associates. To make it more specific, the mention is Nija Samihitam, which means of one's own preference. Not only all the associates of Krishna in Braj, but those who are representing the role model to follow for us. So with this, he's indicating those who possess the mood one is aspiring. And in the context of Kamanuga Bhakti, as Vishwanath mentioned, he will mention some examples like Sri Radha, Lalita, Vishaka, Rupa Manjari, and others. And he makes it clear, he again highlights a little bit the concept of Kamanuga Bhakti or Bhavalas Rati, Radhadasyam, mentioning that although Krishna is the object of desires in Raga Bhakti, whatever the Raga Bhakti you may be in a particular context of Radha and the Gopis, the ladies of Braj headed by Radha, Vishwanath mentioned that they are even more the object of the devotees' desires, indicating with it that a Manjari has more affinity towards Radha than to Krishna, who is the official, if you will, object of Madhurya Bhav. But it's a special type of Madhurya Bhav that Vishwanath is, of course, stressing here. Because of the excessive amount of passionate feelings he mentioned that these ladies has, these role models, Radha, and so on. And finally, he finishes the explanation of this verse of Rupa Goswami by mentioning Kuryat Vasham Brajes Sada. One should always reside in Braj. And if that's not physically possible, he makes the clarification, while at least in one's mind, one should live in Braj. So we tried in our previous meeting to elaborate on this, mentioning again the unique nature of the Bhavalas Rati that Vishwanath is highlighting here. We recognize Krishna mainly as Radharani's dearest beloved in that connection. And we also explain in which sense Manjari Bhav is higher. You can make some objective analysis of sweetness and so on. But we also in the Q&A, we make it further clear that it's not that in one sense they are more surrendered than the others, in the sense that when we say that, that may imply also maybe Yashoda is not giving herself fully to Krishna. She could give something more and is not giving, and that's why the gopis are more surrendered. Not in that sense. Everyone is the most surrendered in their particular feeling, in the particular realm of devotion. And of course, they are ragatmikas, so they are constituted by that love, so they cannot even conceive going somewhere else. That will constitute rasa bhasa. So we explained a little bit this. We spoke about living in Braj, what's the glories of that, one of the items of this Panchanga Bhakti, 5 powerful attributes of Bhakti, practices of Bhakti, and also different verses about the importance of residing there, but how eventually Brajabhas means to internal residence, internal presence there. So if you cannot be there physically for one reason or another, at least mentally you should be there, which is, of course, not an easy task. But as we mentioned, Vrindavan is a state of consciousness. And whatever we speak in regarding Brajabhas, that should also be applied to Nadyabhas, to the concept of Mayapur and our double projection in eternity in service to Krishna and Vrindavan, in service to Mahaprabhu in Nitya Navadvip. And after mentioning this, we shared some words regarding, in this verse of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, the 3 things are mentioned. Hearing and speaking about Krishna and the relationship with one's own role model. 2nd, residing in Vrindavan. And 3rd, Shmaran. So we are spending most of our time trying to unpack this conception of Smaran, which is prominent in Rag, is a function of the mind. But also we try to make it clear our particular Paribars approach, which is of course not the only one, but we are trying just to share some idea. There are different degrees of how to conceive the idea of Shmaram and the qualification to fully enter into that and so on. So we try to make clear Shmaram is not merely remembering something that happened in the past, and I recall that it's not imagination. We gave this example of 3 levels of perception regarding an object, the sound of the object, the meaning of the sound, and the object itself. So related to relative objects, to see the 3 of them as the same, that constitutes vikalpa, or illusion, or imagination. And in regarding absolute objects, if you will, aprakrita tattva, transcendental substance, non-dual, advai gyan tattva, to see the 3 of them as different will constitute imagination. So Smaran has to do mainly with real mental association. Association in our chitta. For this we need a purified chitta to properly engage in full Smaran proper. And there is a krama in this, there is a sequence. So we also quoted Jiva Goswami explaining how all the different aspects will be revealed eventually, like Nam, Rupa, Guna, Lila, name, form, qualities, also Parikar, Seva, and also Shravan, Kirtan, Shmaran. There is some degree. So he kind of said, first Nam, Shravan, hear the name, Nam Kirtan, sing the name, Nam Shmaran, remember the name, remember, quote unquote. Then Rupa, Shravan, Rupa, Kirtan, Rupa, Shmaran, and so on, step by step, sequential process. Now we finished our previous meeting by sharing some words about how Shmaran also comes as a byproduct of Kirtan. So today we will try to make further emphasis about the importance of Kirtan in our tradition, not only in our Bhakti Vinod Paribar, but according to Mahaprabhu, the Bhagavat, our Goswamis, how Shmaran can also come very naturally, very spontaneously by proper absorption in Kirtan. So today let's continue with the second part of our analysis of this 11th verse, the first part of the 11th verse, which has to do with the first verse quoted by Rupa Goswamis. I hope you are not losing in all these different categories and subcategories. So today I will continue. Today we will elaborate further this idea of Shmaran, and we will thus prepare to the second verse of Rupa Goswami, which speaks about Sadhaka Deha and Siddha Deha, Siddha Rupa, Sadhaka Rupa. So that will be quite connected to this. So we already spoke about here and chanting. We already spoke of Brajabhas in the context of this first verse of Sri Rupa, and now we already spoke something about Shmaran. So let's continue speaking about Shmaran and how this happens, how this spontaneous smaran, in which stage we spoke there is a sequential step-by-step process. So how this is going. So for example, if we are in a stage like Nishta, we already mentioned that you need to purify your chitta in order to properly make fit, accommodate all these conceptions, Nam, Rupa, Guna, Lila. So if you're in a stage like Nishta, what to speak below that, chitta is still not enough clean, not sufficiently clean as to accommodate a realization of the associates of the Lord, of the parikars. And thus, it's not able to accommodate Lila as well either, because Lila has to do with loving interaction between Krishna and his associates. So you cannot have Lila without parikar. You can start meditating in the concept of parikar on some level, but Lila is a more dynamic interaction and exchange between Bhagavan and his associates. So even in Nishta, still the chitta requires further purification in order to accommodate in Smaran such a reality, if you will. And this will start to happen above Nishta, that is Ruchi. And that's why Raganuga Bhakti proper, as we already explained, is officially considered proper, starting at the level of Ruchi. That's why Jiva Goswami speaks of Jata Ruchi, as we already mentioned. Jata Ruchi Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti. And before that, we have Ajata Ruchi Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti. We can call that a preliminary function to the official engagement in Raga Bhakti, but those preliminary functions are also part of the practice itself. As at time the example is given in, if you, are engaged in some yajna or sacrifice, there are some preliminary functions to the yajna which are part of the yajna, but also are considered like a prelude, a preface to the real thing, if you will. So in Ruchi, this starts to happen. And in Asakti, the next stage, Srila Jiva Goswami mentions in his Krishna Sandarbha that this thing starts to take more form and more life, if you will. For example, he speaks in terms of mantra maya upasana and swara sikhi. Now, there are two terms that are mentioned along the scriptures of the Goswamis. Mantra maya upasana means particular still picture of the lila. So in the stage of Asakti, this appears naturally. Mantra maya upasana lila in the yoga pith, if you will, in the context of Radha Krishna lila, that's appearing. Again, appearing due to the cleansing of the chitta, and of course of the including of bhakti samskars. That is in a sakti. And when this becomes mature, we enter into the swara sikhi. Swara sikhi means like a flow. Like mantra maya upasana means you have a mantra and you meditate on that mantra, and that represents a particular picture of the lila, still picture. But swara sikhi means the movie starts, the whole movie starts to move, basically. And you enter into what's sometimes called astakaliya lila shmaran. You are, in a natural way, the devotee at this stage, which has to do with mainly bhava, is absorbing the eternal daily dynamics of Sri Krishna going from the different periods as a spontaneous flow, basically. Guru Maharaj also makes that clear in his explanation, on some level makes that clear, of course, in this regard, in his explanation of Shikshastakam's 5th verse, which represents Sakti. And there, as you know, Ajinanda Tanue Kinkaram Patitam Mam Vishame Bhavam Buddho. Mahaprabhu is praying for a spiritual identity. So the idea is that in this stage of a Sakti, the sadhaka is like, as Guru Maharaj will say, our identity is based on attachments. So Asakti represents devotional attachment. So it means if there is an identity corresponding with attachments, spiritual attachment has to correspond with the arisal of spiritual identity. So in Asakti, the devotee has this intense eagerness to be established in my eternal identity and retiring all false sense of identification. Sarvapadi vinirmuktam, all false designation coming from the gunas. So this, Guru Maharaj mentioned, this arisal of the spiritual identity is the realized fruit of the Sambandha Gyan. Sambandha Gyan, which is received as a seed in the moment of Diksha. When Guru is transmitting, giving mantra to the disciple. Sometimes Diksha is defined as Dibya Gyan and so on. The bestowal of Dibya Gyan, which means mantra, a particular sound which has in it speaks about Krishna and the relationship with Guru and Gauranga and so on, and our potential in that relationship. So when that seed is properly watered and so on, that becomes an insight, that becomes realized, especially officially at the stage of Asakti again. So two results come here. One, sadhaka deha, our external body of a practitioner, becomes spiritualized, Guru mentions. And secondly, that sadhaka who had gone through the whole course of sadhana bhakti becomes ready, eligible to engage in lila seva, in internal spiritual body, siddha deha. That has to do mainly with bhava. But in Asakti, this starts to appear in advanced stages of Asakti. So this has to do with diksha, as we spoke recently. Diksha is a process. It's not something that happens in one moment. So diksha is receiving something and doing something, honoring that properly. So when you do that properly, eventually that divya gyan, divine knowledge, takes the form of my eternal relationship with Bhagavan in a revealed way. Some other lineages take this as divine knowledge we will reveal to you, which is your Siddha Swarup from day one. There is some place for that, but we will speak about that in next classes. It's place for that, but in certain stages as well, not necessarily from day one, according to our Bhaktivinoda Parivar's opinion. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur, since we are speaking about Bhaktivinoda Parivar, of course, we have to invoke the teachings of our, if you will, founder Acharya in that connection. He mentions in his Bhajan Rahasya this same very principle. He says that those who are trying to meditate in their Siddha Deha, their mental conceived spiritual identity, before the stage of Asakti, as we mentioned, they will become overwhelmed because of the lacking of support from the Swarup Shakti. They don't have enough bhakti samskars as to accommodate such a meditation, such a deep, broad, powerful meditation. If there is certain things to be cleansed from the chitta, that won't be a good fit, a good combination. He himself, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, in his Jaiva Dharma, for example, he's given the example of, he himself, as we know, received. We will speak about this in further classes. But he himself received what's sometimes called Siddha Pranali or Ekadasha Bhav and so on. He speaks about this in some of his books. So in Jaiva Dharma, for example, Harinam Chintamani, the end sections. But in his Jaiva Dharma, he gives an example of someone receiving Ekadasha Bhav, these 11 ingredients that conform spiritual identity. But the examples that he's sharing in Jaiva Dharma, interestingly, are someone who is a liberated Paramahamsa, this called Sannyasi Thakur in the book, or two other people received it, Vijay Kumar and Brajanath, two of the main characters, but the two of them had already had the darshan of Mahaprabhu and his associates. So my point is, they were not just starting in Krishna consciousness from previous weekend. They already had a considerable level of insight to know what to do with that information. There was enough transformation in themselves to know what to do with that information. So remember, we are speaking about Smaran here. All this is in the context of Smaran. So Smaran basically entails controlling the mind by withdrawing the external senses from all engagement during one's practice. That's a really pretty absorbed-like practice. No? And if one is adopting this process before the heart, or the chitta, as we like to call it, the mind, is considerably purified, what will happen? Well, if you have not enough cleansing in your chitta, your own desires will inevitably force your mind outward to the senses in the course of your meditation. That's the point. There is no like magical formula for you to engage in Smaran while you are filled with an artist and just be absorbing Krishna Lila. Cleansing is required there. So as much as the cleansing is going on, the cleansing process, the more your mind will be able to fix. If not, if you try previously to that, your mind will be drawn naturally to the unnatural realm of sense objects and so on. So today we will also quote quite a lot Srila Jiva Goswami, our Tattvacharya, and especially his Bhakti Sandarbha, among other Sandarbhas also. because he establishes many important points regarding this idea of how attaining smaram is something that happens in different degrees. It's a gradual process. It's there, but there is a step-by-step sequence to follow, to respect. So, for example, in his Anucheda 278, he mentions 5 stages of Smaran. These are well known. And we will see that actually he sets a quite high prerequisite of purity for Smaran in general. Smaran the 5 stages are called Smaran, and one of them, the first one, will be called also Smaran. But he tries to establish, as we will see, quite high, again, prerequisite of cleansing of one's chitta. The first stage is called Smaran, which has to do in this case with general remembrance. No? Not to focus yet, but general remembrance. You can remember Krishna Lila, some pastime, but that doesn't mean that that's a continuous flow, if you will, uninterrupted. So the second one is dharana, following a little bit the terminology found in the different stages in the Ashtanga Yoga till a point. So smaran, dharana. Dharana has to do with concentration. This implies that before that in smaran, there's not that concentration. There is some remembrance, but considerable distraction as well. In dharana, you are making a strong effort to be concentrated. So these are the two beginning stages, which of course will have less rigid prerequisites of purity than the remaining ones, the 3 last ones. So which are these 3 last ones? The next one is dhyana, which is called meditation proper. One thing is remembrance, another thing is meditation. Then it comes dhruva anusmriti, which has to do with intense meditation. Dhruva anusmriti. And finally, samadhi, or trance, uninterrupted flow of absorption, if you will. So, as you can see, and as we have already seen in previous meetings, our devotional practice is a prerequisite for the next practice, for the next stage. To enter into the whatever stage we have mentioned, you need to have gone through the previous one. At least that's a general rule. Of course, Krishna can come and bestow Kripa Siddhi to whoever he likes, but that's not our path. Our path, I mean, we won't practice just thinking maybe Krishna will take pity on me and bestow Kripa Siddhi so I don't need to engage in sadhana. I won't live as if I will be winning the lottery someday. That's not a fact for sure. So we need to understand this, to understand that there is some step-by-step process. We call sadhana krama. Krama means, again, stage, sequence, step, to attain the levels, different levels of smaran practice proper. So also in his Bhakti Sandarbha, and I will mention this also very important point, that Bhakti Sandarbha is a very important book. Not only the Bhakti Sandarbha by itself, but the Sandarbhas of Jiva Goswami and all the Goswami Granthas for sure. And I don't want to enter into detail, it's a big subject, but I hope you know that the Goswamis are our Shastra Gurus, and Mahaprabhu himself has empowered, inspired, established through them his own devotional reality. As Guru Maharaj will say, the Goswamis have made the lake that we can approach to, because Mahaprabhu is a very potent waterfall, that it will be a little bit intimidating to go and bath there. So the Goswamis were especially inspired to perform different functions, if you will, through their writings, one being more specific, like Sanatana Goswami, Sambandacharya Guru, Rupa Goswami, Bhakti, Abhideya, Rasacharya, Raghunath Das Goswami, Prayojan, Tattva, and so on. So Srila Jiva Goswami, he has been mainly considered as the Tattva Acharya, is called sometimes. He's like the, let's say, like the theologian per excellence in our Gaudiya Sampradaya, like Thomas Aquinas, I think you say in English, like to establish a Christian parallel. The one who really developed in a systematical way the epistemology, the ontology, and theology, especially in his Satsandarbhas, which are very like robust treatises. And one of the 6 Satsandarbhas is the Bhakti Sandarbha, when he really goes into depth about the nature of bhakti, the nature of devotion, what's devotion, which are the practices, so much to know there. So I want to mention this because here we are quoting Bhakti Sandarbha over and over, and really there's a lot of significance to this particular book. So in his Anucheda 256, let me read you one section there. He's mentioning, we are speaking about Smaran, and remember, part of the context of where we are speaking is about the importance of Kirtan and how Kirtan very naturally begets Smaran as well. We also quoted one Bhagavad verse in the previous class on Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's purport about how even if you really engage properly in Shravan and Kirtan, there's basically no necessity of engaging separately in Smaran. So here Srila Jiva Goswami says, in order for purification of the heart to take place, it is necessary to begin with hearing the name. As we mentioned, first Nam Shravan. This will be connected to what we spoke last class also. When the heart is purified, one can hear about the Lord's form. And by doing so, the heart becomes fit for revelation of the Lord form. One thing is to hear about that, another thing is to have spurti or revelation of that. When the Lord's name, form, and qualities, Nama, Rupa, Guna, have fully manifested along with his associates, Parikar, the pastimes, Lila, of the Lord unfold properly. So he's presenting a gradual sequential process of unfolding, Nama, Guna, Rupa, Parikar, Lila. It is with this intention that hearing the topics in a specific order was originally stated. The same conclusions apply in regard to singing and remembering, Kirtan and Smaran, the names, forms, virtues, and pastimes of the Lord. So we already spoke about this last class, but I wanted to reinforce the idea about how there is some sequence and some order to trying to accomplish all these levels of devotional experience. And in connection to this, and in connection to the efficacy of Kirtan, to bring about the desired purification, cleansing of the citta, and the eventual results of Smaran that we are studying here, also let me share some quotes from Bhakti Sandarbha by Jiva Goswami. These are coming from 3 different Anuchedas, 273, 74, and 76. So Srila Jiva Goswami says like this: Smaran is not a mental practice, but rather the result of subjugating the mind. And Kirtan is most effective in bringing about this subjugation. Thus, although Raganuga Bhakti involves Smaranam, Kirtan is its primary limb. If one's heart has become pure by surrender, sadhu sangha, and hearing and singing the names, forms, attributes, and pastimes of the Lord, one can perform Smaran, or remembrance of the Lord. However, a pure heart is required for Smaranam. Therefore, it is not as effective as Kirtan. So I think that's crystal clear, as you will say in English. Srila Jiva Goswami really established the supremacy of Kirtan in all the different stages of our progress. First of all, in order to subjugate our mind. And although, as Vishwanath mentioned here, Raganuga Bhakti is characterized by Smaran as a main object, since Raga is a function of the mind. Here Jiva Goswami is mentioning, still Kirtan is its primary anga, primary limb. And he mentions here, before engaging in Smaran, he says, first you have to make your heart pure by surrender, first thing he mentioned. Sadhu Sangha, Shravan, Kirtan, of Nama, Guna, Rupa, Lila. Shravan, Kirtan, then we go to Smaran. But again, he says, for Smaran, you require pure heart. For Kirtan, you don't. Thus, Kirtan is supreme, if you will. But even that Kirtan, I like this point. He mentioned, first of all, surrender. Srila Prahlad Maharaj makes this same point in his famous 2 verses of the Bhagavad. He says, Shravan, Kirtan, Vishnu Smaran, and so on. And then he mentions the second verse, Itim punsam pirta Vishnu bhaktis chenna balakshanam narbarhyatya vidatum by. No, what is this? Well, the point is that he mentions ada. The word ada, that is translated by our acharyas like surrendering. Or in other words, you can engage in Navalaksham Bhakti, Shravan, Kirtan, and Smaran, but if there's no surrender, that's the active principle that makes the other things come alive. So my point is there are so many elements that we have to take into consideration before just trying to jump into Lila Shmaranam or whatever. So here we have some evidence. Hopefully it's quite clear for you. It's enough even, but we will continue. But we have enough evidence here regarding how complete accomplishment in Raga Bhakti can be achieved by Kirtan alone. This is very clear in this statement by Srila Jiva Goswami. So in that sense, we could even say that Smaran or Lila Shmaranam is not necessarily something compulsory on the path of Raga. It's not necessarily at some point you have to adopt that sadhana that some other maybe lineages may really insist on, even from day one. So in this regard, also even regarding the idea of Smaran not being compulsory, some also suggest, quote, this mentioning of Rupa Goswami in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu when he speaks about Ekanga Bhakti, which means you can achieve perfection following one Anga Bhakti only, if you really follow it. So the point will be if you really absorb and focus in, Kirtan, you will attain perfection in that, like Sukadev Goswami. He's the Kirtanakya Guru, the one who shows the example of how attaining perfection exclusively by engaging in Kirtan. Parikshit Maharaj is the Shravanakya Guru, the one who shows the example of how through Shravanam alone attaining the ultimate destiny, and so on. So in that sense, we could say, well, there's this show that don't need for Smaran as a compulsory thing. Now we will show eventually how Smaran can appear eventually naturally at certain stages, and so on. And also remember, Jiva Goswami mentioned, if you want to attain perfection, when he comments these famous Navalaksham Bhakti verses, Shravana, Kirtan, and Vishnu Smara spoken by Prahlad, he says, all these angas of Bhakti, except for Kirtan, all the others, for them to give perfection, they need to be combined with Kirtan, Nam Kirtan. So again, he's mentioning over and over again the supreme foremost position of Harinam Kirtan. So let's continue analyzing this one from another perspective. For example, we are Gaudiyas. No? So I will say that if we are Gaudiyas and we are trying to thread the path of Raga Bhakti, for us, our Istadev is Sriman Mahaprabhu. So in connection to the importance of the holy name, well, the life of Sri Chaitanya himself is for us like the best example, if you will, to begin with. And there's a very nice section in his life that is describing his biographies about this point we are trying to make here, about how through Nam Kirtan you can attain everything in the context of Raga Bhakti. So that has to do with the instructions he received from his Guru Dev, from his Guru Maharaj, Ishvara Puri, his Diksha Guru. And there is a lot of significance in this discussion they have between the two. We cannot underestimate that because it's really revealing those roots that are descending from our Sampradaya, Gaudiya Sampradaya. Sri Chaitanya's lineages is given a particular type of nuanced truths. So there's a lot of this in this particular conversation between Mahaprabhu and his Diksha Gurudev. So let's share a brief summary because it's a very not so brief section. So very briefly, I will present like the philosophical thread, if you will, of the conversation and how it establishes the really, undeniable potency of Srinam to independently bestow the highest perfection in the context of Raga Bhakti. So first of all, if you recall, so this section, Ishvara Puri is promising Mahaprabhu all perfection. Here we are in Chaitanya Charitamrita for the ones who would like to go into further detail. Chaitanya Charitamrita Adi Lila, chapter 7. So there's the narration of Mahaprabhu receiving mantra. So Ishvara Puri mentions to Mahaprabhu, indeed, he says, simply by chanting Harinam, one will be able to see the lotus feet of the Lord. So, Krishnera Charam, that's the famous verse of of Chaitanya Charitamrita also say, Krishna mantra haite have, samsara mochan, Krishna nam haite pave, Krishna racharan. So Krishna nam haite pave, Krishna racharan. One thing is to samsara mochan, to obtain freedom, deliverance from samsara. Other thing is to attain Krishna's lotus feet. That's the positive, immortal, progressive immortality, as Srila Maharaj would say. So Ishvara Puri begins with that. Only simply by chanting Harinam, simply by Nam Kirtan, you can obtain Krishna Charan, which is the ultimate perfection. After saying that, Ishvara Puri orders Mahaprabhu to keep a verse on his tongue that reveals Nam Kirtan, as you may know, as the exclusive method to grant perfection in this particular age. And this verse, which really pumps the post, says, Harir Nam, Harir Nam, Harir Namaiva Kevalam, Kolo Nastiev, 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 Gatiranjata, Nyakanaya Nyaya, the pounding of the post, repeating 3 times, Harir Nam, Harir Nam, Harir Nam. Only through Harir Nam, Namaiva Kevalam. Only with that. There's no need for us something else. Nashtieva, Nashtieva, Nashtieva. Certainly there's no need for something else in this Kali Yuga. Gatiranjataha, to obtain the highest goal. So Ishvara Puri further emphasizes his first point by quoting this famous shloka. And then, interestingly, he, as we know, Mahaprabhu eventually he starts chanting Srinam and experiencing Diksha mantra and Srinam, of course. He's experiencing so much overwhelming, emotional, overflowing ecstasy. So he goes to his Guru, say, Gurudev, what have you given to me? I'm going mad. So Mahaprabhu, Ishvara Puri is validating like the legitimacy of Mahaprabhu's experience regarding Nam, what he's going through by chanting, and he's connecting that with the highest goal. And he says in verse 83 of this chapter, it is the very nature of the Mahamantra to immediately invoke devotional ecstasy for Krishna. That's the nature of Trinam when properly chanted. So he's further confirming the potential of that sound. And finally, he discloses a famous verse, very nice verse from the Bhagavad, which speaks about it is dimmed by, I think, Ishvara Puri himself, not Mahaprabhu, Ishvara Puri here, as the essence of the Bhagavatam. This verse has been considered by many as the most important verse of the Bhagavatam. There are many most important verses in the Bhagavatam from different perspectives. So this is one in connection to Srinam and the potential of Srinam to bestow the ultimate goal. This verse comes in 11th canto, 2nd chapter, and verse 4. It says, Ibam priya sapriya nama kirtya jatanurago drita chutta uchay hasatya choro ditiroti gayatri jatanurago madhavam nityati lokavahyam. It's quoted, of course, in Chaitanya Charitamrita also. And this verse basically implies that when a person is actually advanced, speaking about someone in advanced stage, and is taking pleasure in chanting Srinam, and the names of the Lord which are specifically dear to him, again, some particular relationship is already established, such a person, such a devotee is agitated and loudly chants Sri Harinam. And he also not only chants, but laughs, cries, and becomes overwhelmed, singing just like a madman, without caring for any social opinion, what the outsiders may say, like a madman, basically. So that's it, the last section with Ishvara Puri is further confirming Mahaprabhu's blessing, Mahaprabhu's attainment, if you will. And this is particularly significant, this Bhagavad verse, because let's try to remember the position of Bhagavatam in our theology, such an important book. So all these different ecstatic symptoms described in this Bhagavad verse have to do with the awakening of one's eternal relationship with Sri Hari, which is the fruit of Raga Bhakti. Particular name with one relates to Krishna, a particular relationship. So in this sense, the result of such ecstasy is the chanting of Trinam. So by regarding Nam Kirtan as the cause of that, Ishvara Puri is not only establishing that Nam Kirtan is the prime method to achieve perfection, but also he's placing other methodologies for perfection, such as Shmaran, with all respect, of course, but in a secondary or supportive role to kirtan. So it's not, interestingly, it's not surprising that Srila Jiva Goswami in his Bhakti Sandarbha, he's referring to this very same verse of the Srimad Bhagavatam at the beginning of his analysis of kirtan, to show that the chief result, main result of Nam Kirtan is Prem, as this Bhagavat verse is saying, as Mahaprabhu was showing. So in this way, we see how through Nam Kirtan, proper Nam Kirtan, of course, Nam Kirtan proper, everything could be accomplished. Let's share some other quotation from scripture apart from this important dialogue between Gaur and his Gurudev, which further pound the post. This post has to be really pounded. It has to be really fixed in our conception. So in many other granthas, many other acharyas have confirmed this point as well. We have the famous verse in the Bhagavat, second canto, first chapter, 11th verse, where Sukadev starts to answer to Parikshit's questions. This is one of the main verses. He's basically, when Parikshit is asking about the method and how to do to transcend death, basically the Bhagavat is a book about death, different types of it. So Sukadev mentions constant chanting of the names of the Lord. After the ways of the great authorities is the doubtless and fearless way of success for all, including those who are free from material desires, those who are full of material desires, and also those who are satisfied by dint of transcendental knowledge. Akama sarvokama va moksha kama udaraditi brena bhakti yogina jayetta purusham param. Also Bhagavat says the same thing. Whether you are full of desires, no desires at all, some desires for mukti, for example, whether the case, you just intensely engage in bhakti, which is mainly characterized by kirtan. So Vishwanath is commenting, Vishwanath Chakravarti, to this Bhagavat verse that I just quoted, Sukadev's reply to Parikshit. And Vishwanath is saying that among all forms of bhakti, Shravan, Kirtan, Ashmaran, among these three main, hearing, chanting, remembrance, Kirtan is the main one, he says. Among the various forms of Kirtan, Nam, Rupa, Guna, Lila, Nam Kirtan, Guna Kirtan, Rupa Kirtan, Lila Kirtan, Kirtan of the names is the best. So Nam Kirtan is established. Moreover, in the Kirtan of the names that fit one's bhakti is considered the best of all. So as we already explained, as we progress, we will feel more specific attraction to one particular presentation of divinity. So there will be some names to describe, to depict such manifestation of the divine. And so those will be Vambrata Swapriyanama Kirtan, as the Bhagavad verse that we quoted before say, Swapriyanama Kirtan, Swapriya, which are dear to me, are favorite, my favorite names of Krishna. It has to do with my favorite Krishna, basically. Also in Brihad Bhagavatamrita, some other example of this, which is the main book of our first book of our Sampradaya, Gaudiya Sampradaya, written by Sanatana Goswami. There we find the attainment of Golok Vrindavan. Main theme of Brihad Bhagavatamrita is attainment of Golok Vrindavan by the process of Nam Sankirtan. Attainment of Golok Vrindavan, of course, is the ultimate fruit of Raga Marg, of the Raga Marg, so it's totally connected with that. And this whole book is filled with instructions and verses and sections that highlight and praise the superiority of Nam Sankirtan over other devotional practices. Also, interestingly, it's quite noteworthy that in the final section of the instructions where Maharaj Pariksit is speaking to his mother, Uttara, he recommends, please mother, you follow in the footsteps of the gopis by dedicating yourself to Nam Sankirtan. So he gives that connection with Nam Sankirtan. And also in this Brihad Bhagavatamrita, we find interesting quotes in connection to how Smaranam, it speaks about Smaranam, yes, but it speaks about Smaranam as the fruit of Kirtan, interestingly. I will share you two verses in this connection, come from the second canto of the Brihad Bhagavatamrita, third chapter, verses 4953, spoken by the inhabitants of Vaikuntha. So it's not spoken by a Kanishta Bhakta, but someone already liberated whose words are to be proven as true. So it's first verse, it says, the Vaikuntha Vas is mentioned that if the sense of speech, which sets all the external and internal senses in motion, is brought under control, the tongue, if you will, vachovegam, the speech function, then the mind becomes stable and can properly engage in transcendental smaran, remembrance of the Lord. Remembrance thus develops at the fruit of chanting. The first verse is saying this. If you properly subjugate your tongue, you subjugate your mind. If you control your speech, you have a mind capable of real smaran. So kirtan has to do with subjugating the mind, because kirtan has to do with controlling the speech sense. So in this way, here the Vaikunthabhas are presenting like a sequence. Remembrance is coming after chanting. It's part of the fruit of chanting. In that sense, it's an extension of kirtan. In that sense, it's not different from kirtan. And that's what they say in the second verse that we will share. They say, as a result of Sankirtan, the joy of meditation, which has to do with Smaran, the joy of meditation increases. And as a result of meditation, the sweetness and the joy of Sankirtan increases. In this way, the two invigorate each other, and it is experienced as if they are not two separate activities, but only one. So this is similar to what Sanatana Goswami mentions in the book about humility and prem. Like humility nourishes prem, and prem nourishes humility. But also we should say, in the beginning, when there is no prem, at least there should be humility, some type of humility. You follow? No? When there is prem, there will be a corresponding level of humility which will nurture prem, and prem will nourish that humility. But before reaching prem, there should be some. When prem is not there, humility should be there. You follow? And when prem is there, humility will be there as well. But you enter into prem, but humility, if you will. That's what Krishna Das Kaviraj mentioned in Chaitanya Charitamrita. By following the third verse of Sikshastakam, by chanting with that humility and tolerance, that type of chanting will take you to prem. So on one level, we speak about the two of them, humility and prem, as cause and effect of each other. But that's in an advanced stage. Before that, one will be the cause and one will be the effect, if you will. So here, these same ideas presented regarding chanting and remembrance. Because in the second verse, Sanatana Goswami is mentioning this idea, yes, a result of Sankirtan, Smaranam, the joy of Smaranam nourishes, and the result of that, the joy of Sankirtan. But some verses before, the Vaikunthavasi say what? If you want to engage in remembrance, first you have to control your mind, and first you have to control your tongue, and for that kirtan is necessary. And remembrance develops as a fruit of chanting. That's in the beginning. In the beginning, if you want to smaran, first you have to go through kirtan. And eventually in advanced stages, kirtan and smaran, they will be seen as not separate between each other. But again, the point here is smaran is coming as a fruit of kirtan. Guru Maharaj also once he mentioned that established this connection regarding the first verse of the Bhagavad and the concluding words of that first verse, which are Satyam Param Dhimahi. That's like the how to say, like the Mangalacharan of the Bhagavad. Of course, they have three verses. The first two verses have the three components: the Namaskar Shloka, Vastu Nirdesh, and Ashirvad. That's another thing. But well, the point is, the first verse says Satyam Param Dhimahi, which speaks. Guru Maharaj mentioned that speaks of Krishna Sankirtan. Interestingly, at the end of the Bhagavad, I won't go into detail, but again, Satyam Param Dhimahi is mentioned. And the very last verse of the Bhagavad saying Nam Sankirtanam Yasya Sarva Papa Prana is glorifying Sankirtan. Bhagavad say, let's meditate on the supreme truth. So what's that meditation about? Well, Sankirtan, the word Dhimahi is plural. Let us meditate. So that the fact that they are speaking about plural, Sankirtan has to do with plurality, to congregational participation, chanting. Generally, when we speak about meditation, Guru Maharaj makes this important point. Meditation generally is conceived as a solitary affair. I will meditate. So the Bhagavatam is starting its whole treatise by saying, let's meditate, inviting us to a congregational meditation. So that has to do with Sankirtan. And he further quotes this verse, would say, Diya sada paribapyana vishtadoham, and so on, glorifying Mahaprabhu in its most essential way. And this is saying, your lotus feet are the object of Dhyam Sada. Charanara, Vande Mahapurushate Charanara. Dhyam Sada means your feet are the object of constant meditation. So Guru Maharaj mentions what kind of meditation can be constant, performed anywhere at all times, without hard or fast rules. Sri Krishna Sankirtan. Smarana Nakil. Niyamana Smarana Nakalaha. So when Mahaprabhu is saying that in Sikshastaka, Mahaprabhu is speaking about Kirtan, but also then includes Nam Shmaran. We are speaking about second verse here. Second verse. Smaranena Kalaha. So practically Mahaprabhu there, he's merging the two together. Kirtan and Smaran, similar to what Sanatana Goswami mentioned in his Brihat Bhagavatamrita. Kirtan and Smaran, in one sense, are the same. But one is giving birth to the other if you pay proper attention. And one more Shastra Praman, one more evidence that comes from Raga-vartma-candrika itself. Now we are studying verse number 11 of this first section, but in verse number 14, which comes almost at the end, interestingly, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur himself makes the point. So let me give you a trailer of this, our future classes. So this 14th verse, Vishwanath is mentioning, it has been mentioned earlier that remembrance is the primary limb of Raganuga Bhakti, which is what he's saying in this verse, 11th verse. But now he's saying the 14th verse after due consideration, but one should understand that remembrance is dependent on Kirtan. In the present age of Kali, it is the practice of Kirtan that grants the eligibility to enter into bhajan. Because as all the scriptures proclaim, Kirtan is superior to all the other limbs of bhakti and bestows the highest result. So he himself makes the point, even though he's saying Smaran is the primary limb of Raganuga Bhakti, yes, we agree with that, but in which sense is the primary limb of Raganuga Bhakti? It's the primary limb of Raganuga Bhakti in the sense that Smaran is coming from proper Kirtan, and that Kirtan properly executed becomes a Smaran at a particular stage, and that type of Smaran and at that type of stage will become fully important, all important for the execution of Raga Bhakti at that stage. But to reach all that, Kirtan is the primary limb. Over and over again, this is established. So whenever we hear this idea that Smaran is the most important aspect of Raganuga Bhakti, we agree, but we have to put that in context, because a text out of context can become a pretext. And we can just trying to give Smaran in a very cheap way without proper Sambandha Gyan and just rushing into something that won't be very becoming. So proper Smaran, yes, will be totally crucial, but that Smaran that is coming as a natural byproduct of proper execution of Kirtan. That absorption of the mind that will be necessary for advanced stages in Raga Bhakti. So in this way, just to finish with some brief words, and we are given some minutes for questions and answers if you have. By stressing Nam Kirtan as the best means to attain the platform of Smaran, concentrated meditation, and the best way of meditating on Krishna in general, we members of the Bhakti Vinod Parivar, actually, what we are saying here is not our own specific stance, that is too conservative and whatever. Actually, we are trying to show how this point, we are following basically the instructions that have been of how to worship outlined by the Sid Goswamis, the Bhagavat, Mahaprabhu himself, who singled out Kirtan as the best form of worship. He says Sarvashistranam Sankirtan. The Bhagavad itself is characterizing Mahaprabhu's method of worship, Yagnai Sankirtana Prayaya, Sankirtan, Kirtan is a method, if you will. As Guru Maharaj will say, to the madness of Sriman Mahaprabhu and to our eventual madness as well in the context of Raga Bhakti. So, of course, when we are saying this, we are not implying that remembering any form of remembrance now is wrong. But it's important to understand the levels of smaran, the levels of absorption, how absorption is coming by cleansing of the heart, how this cleansing is happening by properly embracing kirtan, and how that proper embracing of kirtan will eventually naturally beget a spontaneous type of absorption. But again, in the present stage, one can remember the Dham, we can remember the Lila as it is described of scripture, again, in certain context, in certain revealed parameters. That won't be imagination. With proper Siddhanta understanding, this is absolute, this is this, this is that, till we reaches more advanced level stages of practice. But again, when we reach the level of advanced practice, Rucha, Sakya, and so on, Smaran proper will be truly, truly possible. And in the meantime, generally, as we have seen, the recommendation given by our acharyas is that let's concentrate on kirtan, on Krishna, of Krishna Nam on one side, and let's concentrate on dhyan, or Smaran, if you will, of Krishna Nam in the form of japa, that's considered Smaran, and also one's Diksha mantras. That's also part of dhyan or Smaran. And of course, at the same time, meanwhile, one can try one's best to remember Krishna, his form, Krishna's qualities, Krishna's lila, Krishna's abode throughout the day, as much as we can according to our adhikar in a realistic, sustainable way, and according to how that comes to us in the context of revelation, not according to our own science fiction projection, if you will. Let me finish almost with some brief words by Guru Maharaj as a way of closing this particular topic. He's mentioning the following. He says, Harinam is actually central to Raga Marg, and Smaranam is to be fortified by it. Furthermore, it is Harinam that one can engage in despite an impure heart, whereas Smaranam requires a pure heart in order to engage in it effectively. Mahaprabhu has shown this by his own example, and he is Krishna in his Acharya Lila. He has also taught this in his Sikshastakam. Adhikar for Siddharupa Seva, or servicing one's internally spiritual body, is a widely debated issue, with conservative and liberal interpretations of it and of the concept of lobha, and what's greed, the adhikar for engaging in that. However, Guru Maharaj finishes, Srila Jiva Goswami Pad has, in my opinion, written most authoritatively on the subject in his Bhakti Sandarbha, leaving little room for doubt. And those are the sections we have shared today from Bhakti Sandarbha. And these words of Guru Maharaj kind of summarize what we have seen today. How Smaran is central to Raga Marg in a certain way, in a certain stage, but Kirtan is actually even more central. And Smaran is fortified by it, because one can engage in that from the very beginning with an impure heart even. Mahaprabhu established this following the Bhagavat. Eventually, and here I mentioned this last part of Guru Maharaj also, the adhikar for Siddharupa Seva, widely debated issue, conservative liberal interpretation. I'm mentioning this because next class we will continue with this. Next class we will see the second verse of the 3 verses of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu that Vishwanath quotes in this 11th prose of his Raga-vartma-candrika. And this second verse, Rupa Goswami will mention, is the most well-known of the 3, I will say. Seva sadaka rupena chisida rupena chatrahe tad bhava lipshana kriya brajalokana shatran, like serving, following the mood of the Brajavasis, both in one sadaka deha and in one siddha rupa. So what does it mean? What's the implications of that? How early, what can we enter into that? All this discussion we have had today and in our previous lecture, I think, is setting the stage for more and officially entering to that starting from next class. So we'll continue with that next week. So I will finish here. And if you have any questions, we have some time for that.
Maharaj, I have a question.
Yes, Brigopal.
Dandavad.
Yeah.
I actually have a doubt.
Only one. You are very fortunate.
Yes. Only one in this connection.
Okay.
In 2 of the 3 verses of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu that Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Pad is writing about in this context, we hear something like according to one's own preference or according to one's taste or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But now when we come to Vishwanath Chakravarti and his understanding of Raganuga sadhana bhakti, there isn't very much place for one's own preference. It's all about Kamanuga bhakti, or if we take another step, then we can include also Sakya Bhava. But there isn't really much option for your own preference. If we look at the descriptions of the saints in our Guru Parampara, they all belong to the same group. It's Lalita, it's Rupa Manjari, and so on. So my doubt is Vishwanath Chakravarti actually explaining Raganuga Bhakti in the same way as Rupa Goswami intended it? And this also connects with how Rupa Goswami is saying that Raganuga Bhakti is the same as Maryada Marga of the Vallabhas.
Pushti Marga.
Yes. And of course, the Vallabhas, they are not doing Manjari Seva.
Mm-hmm.
Maryada Marga means something a little bit different in that Sampradaya, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So this is my doubt. Is Vishwanath Chakravarti actually explaining what Rupa Goswami is saying, or is he developing Rupa Goswami's ideas in a particular direction?
Okay. So, of course, I imagine that different people may have different opinions in that regard, and many maybe may take Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's words as to further try to establish to be, I mean, they will say Vishwanath is really explaining what Rupa Goswami meant, and that means to be a Rupanuga, and to be a Rupanuga is to follow Kamanuga, and that's the all in all, there's no other option. And some will take that stance of trying to present Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur in that, like, according to also the samskars they have received, I will say, from their own parampara and gurus and so on. To a point, it's understandable, always if they remain on a certain respectful stance for the one that may have another type of bhakti samskars. But personally, I will say that Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, of course, he's speaking mainly from the vantage point of Kamanuga Bhakti here, because again, and I mentioned that that's his own stance. He's really into that, and we know that this is mainly emphasized, as Guru Maharaj will say, our sampradaya is saturated with that. Rupa Goswami, he speaks about other possibilities in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, but at the same time, he's dedicating a whole separate book to Madhurya Bhav, not even speaking in too much detail about Manjari Bhav. That's mainly the task of Raghunath Das Goswami, if you will, between the 6 Goswamis. But at the same time, on the other side, you may find someone like Jiva Goswami, who is, if you read, I don't know, Gopal Shampu, for example, he, of course, glorifies. I mean, I'm not going with this, I'm not implying regarding the Swakiya Parakiya controversy. That's a whole other chapter. But when he speaks about the different rasas, and especially when he speaks about Sakya Bhav, I mean, if you don't know that Jiva Goswami is the one speaking there, you think, oh, here is Saka, or he's someone with affinity for Sakya Bhav, glorifying their pals, if you will, because he expresses so much affinity towards that. So personally, my point is Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is someone really very much emotionally intense author. Now, when you read his Sarartha Darshini commentary on the Bhagavad and how he speaks about bhakti, on some moments it sounds too extreme, too liberal. Like from day one, you are being haunted by rasa and things like you may find, oh, this is quite an exaggeration, but actually he's really meaning that. No, I mean, and he's saying that from, of course, a particular insight he's having. So my point is, he has a particular subjective emotion, and he is presenting that. I mean, he's making some emphasis in that direction. But personally, again, and I know some other voices will disagree with me, I don't think that personally here in Raga-vartma-candrika, if you will, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is revealing the real intention of Rupa Goswami, which means that only Kamanuga Bhakti is possible and available. Yes, we could say mainly. No? To that degree, we accept. Of course, that's the main current. That's what Mahaprabhu came to give mainly, Natoj Malarasan Swabhakti Sriyam. But again, as we know, especially being in connection with our Guru Maharaj, and I think Sakya Mandalam will be a further reply to your question in comprehensive way. There is a current there in our Sampradaya we cannot deny from so many sides. So we should learn to harmonize all this. And yes, Vishwanath is, as we mentioned from day one in our lecture, in our course study, he's even considering the representational incarnation of Rupa Goswami in regarding how saturated his scriptures, his books are with rasa, and as a special affinity in the direction of Madhurya Bhav. And he's developing, of course, he's writing in further detail about certain things that maybe Rupa Goswami did not in certain books. Of course, Rupa Goswami wrote Utkalika Balari and some other series of prayers more connected directly to Manjari Bhav, so that's there. But again, personally, I won't say, and we have to continue seeing the remaining of the Raga-vartma-candrika, and I think that we will find there some, so I want to give time to that, but certain statements that even though Vishwanath continues speaking about Kamanuga Bhakti mainly, certain sections can be also rendered in connection to other possibilities as well. No? But again, yeah, the main current is Manjari Bhav. That's undeniable. I mean, we cannot deny that. But not to the point, at least in my opinion, again, not to the point of considering that there cannot be any other possible affinity there, especially regarding Priyanarma Sakya. Or if you have that affinity, you are not a Rupa Nuga, and all this type of statement that we know, and that some people could take Vishwanath's words or Raga-vartma-candrika as an argument for that. No? But again, it can lie in the realm of subjectivity, and some other will say, that's your proof. We cannot just go and say, actually Vishwanath is meaning this and he's not allowing. If you put all the scriptures in context as all of what our acharyas have said, there is place for that. There is not place for only one option in the Gaudiya Sampradaya, even though there is one main option. But main doesn't mean everyone will fit there. So there's also place for diversity there. So I hope that helps. The rest will be revealed through Sakya Mandalam. Something else before finishing? Some other question? Okay, so it seems that we finished here today. So thank you very much for your time, and we will see each other next Monday. And we will be starting with the second verse of these three verses about Raga Bhakti, quoted by Vishwanath, authored by Sri Rupa. Srila Gurudev ki jai, Sriman Mahaprabhu ki jai, Sri Harinam Sankirtan ki jai, Sri Raga-vartma-candrika ki jai, Sri Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur ki jai, Sri Kalsi ki jai, Gaur Bhaktivinoda ki jai. Gaur Premananda Haribo Vancha Kalpataru Vishtagripa Sindhuvya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai. Gaur Haribo.
Haribo.